Okay, well, a very good morning, evening, afternoon, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to this BA community webinar. For those of you attending live, I'm sorry we're just a few minutes late. We had a last-minute technical glitch, but I'm really pleased that that Lori's here with us this evening. As those of you who have attended other webinars will already realize that the format is slightly different. We're experimenting this evening with more of a sort of conversation. So rather than just having slides, we're going to have a conversation about a topic which I think is really important, and one that perhaps sometimes doesn't get enough attention in the BA world, and that's the topic of data. And I'm so pleased that Lori Silverman is able to join us this evening. Now, I've known of Lori's work for a long time, and we've even spoken at the same conferences, but have never managed to actually meet in person yet. But we connected on LinkedIn, and we just found we had a lot of professional areas that we agree so firmly on. So I was really pleased that Lori said yes to come onto this webinar this evening. So, I mean, before we start, Lori, what would be really useful is if you could give the audience a bit of an idea of your background. I'm sure many people will know you from your keynote presentations, from your workshops, but a bit about your background and about the topic that we're going to cover this evening.
Sure. So I'm going to start in 2013. I had written a book called Business Storytelling for Dummies with my colleague, Karen Dietz. And about 6 to 8 to 9 months later, I called her up on the phone and I said, why did we put chapter 8 in the book? And chapter 8 was called What to Do with Data. And she said to me that she had been seeing a number of articles in the data science community about the importance of storytelling. And she thought it would be useful for us to write about that topic, which we did. When I stepped back and started to canvass all of the articles that were out there, and now by this time we're talking 2014, 2015 timeframe, I noticed that there were 3 gaps in the research that people didn't seem to know about. One was people weren't talking in the data science community or anywhere in the data community about the research around the brain. Okay. And how critical it was to understand that. The second piece they were not talking about was what really is a story. And there's a big misnomer that a data visualization is a story, and it's not. A story has a very specific kind of a narrative structure to it. So I knew that that was a gap. And then the third gap that I saw was that outside of the data science framework called AWESOME, there wasn't a comprehensive framework that focused not on data, but on decision making. And so I stepped back and I said to myself, do I want to do anything about this? And I kind of had this epiphany. And the epiphany was, oh my gosh, all these years that I've been working, which is close to 40 years, has prepared me for this moment in time, has prepared me. I worked, I had statisticians glued to my hips early on in my career, helping me process data for clients and communicating it to them. I had worked for over 15 years in the business storytelling arena. And I also had been looking at brain research even early on in my career, because most people don't realize that I started out as a therapist.
Oh, wow, really? Wow.
Yeah. I have 2 graduate degrees, one's in counseling and one's an MBA, so sometimes my brain is schizophrenic. But I understand the brain, and I understand what makes people change, which is why I've been able to work on change initiatives of almost 1 million people in size. And so when I put that all together, I said, I think I'm the one to tackle this. I think I'm the one who understands how to actually embed data in cultures. I did it for a number of years. And so that's what got me to be with you today. And really, I think informs not just my passion, but what I really think is my legacy.
Wow, absolutely. I mean, that's fascinating, and I mean, there's so much that you've just said that we'll unpack throughout the webinar. But when you were talking about the people and the culture, that really resonates with me, because I mean, as business analysts, like often the change itself, I mean, it's hard. It's hard. but actually everything surrounding it is harder. And you know, your comment about the narrative, the storytelling, getting people to buy in and understand is so important. So fantastic. Thanks for that introduction, Lori. So I mean, the title of the webinar is "We're Drowning in Data. Are you prepared to come to the rescue?" Love the title. But what are we rescuing here?
You know, that's a really good thing. So let me go back to when I was in London and in November, and I was keynoting at enterprise data and a BI and business analytics. There are a couple conferences that were co-located. I was talking to a guy who heads up a data group for a petroleum company. And I said to him, and this was kind of jokingly, because he and I had talked even before I'd gotten to the UK. I said, I'll bet that in your organization, someone said, oh, data, it's important. We need to hire a data scientist. So you went and you hired a data scientist. And then that data scientist said, I can't do all the work by myself. We got to hire more people. And by the way, not all the work is for a data scientist. So they went and they hired folks in data analytics or business analytics or enterprise data management and data warehousing. And I said, before you knew it, you had this team of people. And he said, yeah, it's like 40 some people in size.
Wow.
Said, but I bet. I said, is it giving you business value? And he looked at me and he said, you know what? That's the question we're starting to ask ourselves. So the first issue that we need to overcome is this is not about the data. This is about better decision making. It is about getting results for organizations and actions off of higher quality business decisions. Now, when we need to bring something new into an organization, part of doing that from a change perspective is create a new group. But that is not the end all and the be all. Because at some point that group has to go away and we need to embed it into the DNA of the organization. And no one, when they're setting up these initiatives, is thinking about that. So that's the first thing we have to rescue. Because I am going to talk about a role that I think BAs are perfectly positioned to do, and no one is talking about them doing it. The second rescuing that we need to do goes back to my comment about framework. Mm-hmm. So let me just give you kind of a high level view of where I think some of the gaps are that somebody needs to fill. So simply put, we want data to lead us to decisions, and then we want to be able to deploy those decisions. But over here, we have to ask ourselves why? Because we need action, and it's not adoption. It's action. Adoption's like I choose to do something. I'm talking about the act of doing. But if I unpack this just a little bit, there are gaps. There's a gap before the data piece, which is what data are we trying to collect, and what business decision do we want to address? That's the first gap. The second gap comes between the data and the decision piece. And there's so much in there. If I have the right data, is that data clean? Can I trust it? And can I trust the people who give it to me? Which I'm finding out as I do more work worldwide, for some countries is a big issue culturally. If I don't trust you, I don't trust the data and the story, I'm not going to look at it. And then once I have the right data and I start to maybe create some data visualizations, which give me observations, those observations aren't insights. And people really clearly don't understand what that means. And I think that there are several types of insights in the data. And then once I've got the insights, then the question becomes, how do those insights relate back to the question so we can make a decision? And how do I make that decision? Once I make the decision, then I've got another gap to deployment. How am I going to communicate that to people in such a way that they will go, oh, yes, oh, yes, that's the direction we need to head in. And then how do we take action? So every step along the way has these gaps. And what I don't see is I don't see any role being defined, other than maybe one, that orchestrates the whole, the entire thing, from the problem statement, or maybe not even a problem, an opportunity statement, to the action. So I went in search, because people talk about this role called data interpreter, data translator, business scientist, analytics translator. I mean, and it's coming out in the data science literature. And I found one article that I think describes, it's from Harvard Business Review, if I can have a second, if you don't mind, if I just read this.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, it's an article called "You Don't Have to Be a Data Scientist to Fill This Role." So it doesn't, which is kind of an interesting way of positing it. But what I liked about this is that I think that this fits my definition of what's missing. These authors say, at the outset of an analytics initiative, which, by the way, I think is the wrong phrase. It should be at the outset of a decision-making initiative. Translators draw on their domain knowledge to help business leaders identify and prioritize their business problems based on which will create the highest value when solved. Well, doesn't that sound like the work of BAs? And then it says these opportunities may be within a single line of business or cross-initiative. And then it says translators tap into their working knowledge of AI and analytics to convey these business goals to data professionals who will create the models and solutions. And then these translators will ensure that the solution produces insights that the business can interpret and execute on, and ultimately communicate the benefits of these insights to business users to drive adoption. And again, I would say action. And it says, given the diversity of potential use cases, translators may be part of the corporate strategy team, which I think is the strategy role BAs have been looking for, a functional center of excellence or even a business unit assigned to execute analytics. And then they go on to say, what skills should you have? Leader, communicator, project manager, industry expert. Doesn't say business analyst skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, right. And so I think that that's the gap that we have to talk about filling, because here's my contention. If people in organizations who already have roles today do not just start doing this work, somebody's going to bring an outsider in to do it and give them a job title. And we can't do that. That's not going to help us. That's not going to help us embed this thinking into organizations.
It's really interesting. I was nodding along as you were saying that, Lori, because it's like, even in the description from the Harvard Business Review, and you talk about problem or opportunity statements. You talk about understanding needs. You talk about helping people to make informed decisions. That's, to me, that is business analysis, right? And that, that there's a strong element. There are different flavors of business analysis, of course, but we talk a lot in the BA sphere about having T-shaped BAs. So of course we need to have our analysis skill set, but we can work in different areas and so on. So this is really, really interesting stuff. And so let me throw a scenario at you, which is one I think many BAs will identify with, which is BA related, and it's a little sort of data related as well, which is, you get that request through where someone's like, I need you to write some requirements because we need another report. And you're like, but you've already got 100 reports, and I know nobody reads any of them. What makes, convince me that you need another 101st report? What should we do in those sort of circumstances? Because it feels like there's a bigger root cause at play here.
Well, there is a bigger root cause, and the root cause is that most of our dashboards today were not designed with decision making in mind. What they were designed with was, what data do people want to look at? And so our dashboards aren't keeping up with where business leaders are. We need to step back. That's a big issue. We need to step back and say to business leaders, what decisions are you trying to make? What actions are you trying to figure out whether or not you should do? And then dashboards need to be redesigned for that purpose. Now you see is like companies like Google with their OKR approach moving in that particular direction, but a lot of organizations aren't. So they're looking at old data, trying to make current decisions, and it's not helping them. So it's not surprising to me that a business leader is asking over and over and over again. Now, what I want to describe is true not only for the dashboard piece, but also for exploratory studies. I think the biggest role that we can play is an elicitation of what that decision is. So, people come to us and they say, I want this data. The worst thing you can do is just follow through with their request. The second worst thing you can do is to ask them more about the data that they want to collect, because that's, again, not where we're going to get to action. It's a little bit helpful to ask about what do you want to learn, but learning still is not an actionable piece. So what you have to get to is what are you really trying to do? what is it that's really either bothering you, or what opportunity are you trying to ferret out? Or maybe you just have, as a business leader, a small pot of money and you're just trying to figure out, like, what's the best use of these small buckets of dollars in marketing? And what initiatives should I fund? But we have to start digging below the surface to hear those conversations, because until we hear them, we're not going to understand the contextual nature of where this data is being used. And so I think when people are coming back for the 101st report, there's a whole bunch of reasons. It could be that things are just changing so quickly, they have changed what they need from you, right? On the other hand, it could be that the data that they're looking at is never going to give them what they're seeking. It's never going to help them. And they're still trying to use that current data to make a new decision.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and again, as with my BA hat on, there's so much, so many ideas are flowing from what you're saying, Lori. But when you were saying there, I was thinking, to draw an analogy of like a doctor making a diagnosis. Well, it's like, if you just went and had a full blood count or whatever, and you noticed your platelets are 117 and the bottom threshold is 150. Well, that's not actually very useful, right? That doesn't tell you very much, and it might be clinically normal, but right. just saying, well, can we have a more detailed study of my platelet count in my bloods or whatever it happens to be, is not useful. So actually, whereas if you speak to the patient and say, what's your problem, or what are you trying to do, or what can't you do, then you work out what tests to run, and maybe it's similar in a business environment, understanding the decision or action as you were referring to. Helps us to sort of shape that data question. Fantastic.
Absolutely. And I love what you said about it. So I just wanted to pick up on something you said, which is, what is it that you can't do today? What is the decision you cannot make that you're trying to make, that you would like to be informed by data?
Yeah.
And I think that's an absolutely key piece to this, because what we also get stuck on is we get stuck on looking at data only for problems, and we completely miss the strategic opportunity to use data.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So let me so a scenario I've seen on more than one occasion is perhaps a business area that might ask for the 101st report, and then the 102nd, or the piece of data or whatever, and 103rd and 1000th, and as a BA, you eventually kind of realize they're just deferring the decision. And actually more data isn't helping them, it's hindering them, because it's just creating more uncertainty. Like what would you suggest in those situations?
Well, I think, again, it comes back to, this is a cultural issue, and a lot of it has to do with how the human brain is structured, but also how organizations are run. So you need to be, I keep saying to people, and I had a guy write to me yesterday about this on LinkedIn, about what do you mean by the business of the business? You better understand your business really well, because the first thing you need to figure out is this a political issue?
Yes.
If it's a political issue, I'm probably not getting in the middle of it. It's something that's playing out between a group of executives, and I just need to know what that is. Now, I might go to a business leader. By the way, I can only do this if I have a really good relationship with them, so that's one of the keys to really making this work. I could go to a business leader and say, you know what? You've asked me the 101st, 102nd, 103rd. I feel like there's something you're not telling me. And I would hope that we have a good enough relationship where you would be willing to disclose what that is. So I can understand why it is that you keep asking me to do this. So that's one reason. A second reason could be that they just don't know. Like, I used to have a boss years ago. I worked in a part-time role in for a university. I was the head of a project management master's certificate program. And my boss would come in my office when I was in there literally every 30 minutes and change his mind. I was just like, I learned. It's like, how am I going to stay the course? While he's veering off in all these different directions. Because eventually, like a week later, he'd come back to the same thing. So I just had to try to figure out, with my knowledge of him and with the bigger direction he was trying to go, what data he really needed based on my understanding of that system. And then after a while, we kind of got in tune with each other, and he didn't do as many changes. And he would just say to me, well, you kind of know what I need. You kind of know. Now, I don't want you to stop there, because most times we don't really know, like we're not a mind reader. So we still do need to clarify and ask, which are those wonderful elicitation skills that BAs have developed over the years. But there's another piece that's going on, and that is that the brain can get overloaded on data. We can overthink the situation. And what happens is we then attach higher value to getting more and more and more and more data, because what we're trying to do is reduce 100% of the uncertainty or the risk, and that's never going to happen. And what those leaders need to be coached to do is just to take action, just to make a decision. Because if you make the decision and it's wrong, you'll know. If you make the decision and it's right, you'll know. But if you don't make a decision at all, you won't know. So I think we have to understand that. And then we have to understand another dynamic that goes on in decision making, because this is how typically people act. And this has to do with dominant structuring in the brain. Typically, if people are posed with a problem, they'll immediately kind of scan, they'll figure out what their options are, they'll choose the best choice, and then they'll go and they might even try to confirm what that best choice is. So when you find leaders who are not doing that, something else is going on. And that's why I say I think there's a couple of other options you have to ferret out here, but you got to know the leader well enough to be able to have the conversation.
Yeah, the leader and as you say, the business context as well. We need to know the business context that the decision's being made in. I really liked another thing that really resonated with me that you said there, Lori, was the idea about sometimes it's, just make a decision and see what happens. Yeah. And that plays very, very well into the sort of business agility or organizational agility space, where sometimes, there's so much uncertainty, so many moving parts, you can't know in advance. But what you can do is define some form of success criteria, figure out how you're going to know, and then sort of measure after. So right. There's sort of multifaceted conversation.
Absolutely.
So one thing that was springing to mind as you were saying that was also confirmation bias, where someone has a hunch, and in our lives as BAs, those hunches often end up as business cases in some organizations, and then you get people saying essentially, find the data to prove my hunch, which is a difficult place to be in. So what sort of ideas would you have around that, Lori?
Well, first of all, if it's back to the situation we're talking about with the 101st, 102nd, 103rd report, it's probably not confirmation bias that's playing in, because it's just like way too many iterations. You would have known about it sooner. I think a couple of things. Number one, we need to recognize that intuition is a form of qualitative data. Somehow we keep thinking in all of this work that we're looking at that we need to reduce it down to zero intuition. That is absolutely incorrect. And if we have some time, I'll talk about why that is later on. So I want to know, if a business leader thinks that it's something, I want them to feel comfortable enough to tell me what their hunch is. Now, I'm going to know if they come to me and they say, I would like you to collect data on these 4 segments. And oh, by the way, I would like segment 1 to be this, and segment 2 to be this, and segment 3 to be this, and segment 4 to be this. That's not an analytical exercise. That's a predetermined solution. So that's because you have to learn to listen for this type of thing as well. The second way that I might see it, I had a finance analyst tell me that this happened to him. He had a business leader come to him, and the leader said, I would just like some data. And the guy said, well, you want me to, I'm happy to get that for you and kind of massage it and tell you what I see in it. He's like, no. I just want the record. And then the guy came back a few days later and he said to the financial analyst, that wasn't the right data. You need to take out these pieces and you need to give me the data. And that's a clue, right? That someone's got some confirmation bias. Now, as I said, intuition's a form of data. It's not right or wrong. What I say to leaders is this: if I know that they have confirmation bias, is I say, allow me to look at the data. What is it that you're trying to do? Mm-hmm. I know that you think that this is the answer. Will you give me 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours to just go look at the data absent of what you're telling me? And if it confirms what you say, great, let's move on. If it doesn't confirm, I need on a handshake with you that you will listen to me. Mm-hmm. That you will take what I say into account. Now, I know you still may not do what I tell you to do, but I still would just like this agreement that you'll hear me and hear me out. So that would be the way that I would handle it. But again, that comes back to this huge continuum, right? In this framework, that you have to be the person who's orchestrating and bridging all these gaps for that business leader.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because again, as you were talking there, Lori, I was thinking about an example a while back in a financial services organization where an exec, and she was a fantastic sponsor, and she had aha moments. So she could foresee the market, and in fact, she certainly had a good idea of the strategy, and she foresaw a legislative change that was likely to come and eventually came. And she kicked off a project to develop a product which would be suitable for that new legislative environment, probably before any of the competitors did, I suspect. And so that, I guess, is an example of intuition that was acted upon. But where does the challenge we had, though, as BAs there, was that happened before it sort of got into our pipeline. So she was doing all of that ideation and looking at data, and then when it came to us, it was, right, this is the product design, we need you to figure out what the impact is on processes and systems and whatever. Whereas actually, I think myself and many other BAs feel that we ought to be in at the early strategy analysis phase as well. So I guess I'd any tips you have in that area, but also that particular, because you mentioned this spectrum from sort of data decision deployment. Where does insight fit into all of, or intuition rather, fit into that sort of continuum?
Well, actually, I'm going to pick up on the two words that you just said,
Okay.
because that is actually an example of foresight and insight. It's intuition is based on our experiences, and it gradually unfolds. Where someone will say, "I kind of have a gut feeling. I kind of think." Insight, and especially from a foresight perspective, and this, by the way, the analytics literature doesn't deal with whatsoever, but my framework actually can handle this, is, and I'm teaching this, by the way, in a strategic thinking class right now. So I say to leaders, there's a lot of foresight tools, environmental scanning, scenario development, things like that, where you can stand in the future. So one example is I was working with a client on a study looking at the year 2040, where we were learning everything we could about that year. And when you start to see things, you get these amazing ahas. And by the way, the academic research actually talks about an insight as an aha. Okay. Literally a complete idea comes to you in an instant. They see it as akin to like a sculptor who can look at a piece of marble and know what the end result's going to be like, or a painter who sees an empty canvas and actually can see the end result on the canvas. It is not gradual. It is discontinuous. And so yesterday, I was sharing this with someone, and the person said to me, is there an academic definition of insight? Because like, how would I know if I had it if I didn't have a definition? So I just want to read you a definition and then talk about how it fits into the continuum. So the academic literature around this, as it talks about, and this is the general consensus, is that an insight is a sudden and unexpected understanding of a previously incomprehensible problem or concept. The solution suddenly and unexpectedly pops into the mind of the decision maker, and it is instantaneously self-evident. But it's not self-evident to anybody else. So now let's come back to your bigger, right? She's at the action end. She's like, I want you to do this. What she's done, and she probably can't even describe if you were to just ask her questions, but I think we can ask her a story prompt, is she's been scanning. She's been seeing what we talk about in foresight as perking signals. Little tiny little signals off to the side. Not necessarily trends, not necessarily patterns, but these little tiny little things. And in her brain, she's been connecting the dots. Mm-hmm. Now for her, she doesn't need to make certain that that data is trustworthy or clean, because it's about the future. She's positing an idea, right? And she doesn't even necessarily have to trust the sources. She just has to know that all of these things are possibilities of what could be. She puts them together in her brain, and then all of a sudden one day, she has this insight. She can't, and it's like it comes to her, and it's like, oh my gosh, we need to do this, and we need to do this now, right? And then she starts in her brain sketching out all of the individual pieces, and then she might even, I don't know if this happened or not, she might even run to people in the organization and say, you're not going to believe it. I've got this idea. You got this idea, this is the right thing. I know we need to do it. People are like, how do you know it's right? I just know. I just know. And you know what? Most times they're not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Most times they're not wrong. Now, what I'd ask her to do to relay it to other people is I would start out by asking her a story prompt, because I'm trying to get at her mental model. I'd say, tell me about that moment when you just knew that this was the right thing to do. And when she describes that story to you, what she's going to do is she's going to talk to you about the data she looked at. She's going to talk to you about the mental models her mind went through. She's going to talk to you about whether or not she trusted it. She's going to talk to you about when that first piece of insight came to her, and then when she realized that she had to make a decision and take action. She's not going to tell you that if you ask questions, because questions don't get at the frame of how our brain does things, at the unconsciousness that goes with the way we think. A story will help to articulate that. So I think that when we ask for those stories from leaders like that, it gives us a better appreciation for what they looked at. And if for some reason we think there's a blind spot in their thinking, right? Maybe there's a piece of data they overlook, then we can start through curiosity, through dialogue, not debate, dialogue. And I would just say, I'm curious. I've been looking at the future too, and so and these other people have been positing these ideas. How did you take that into account?
Mm-hmm.
Because now I'm trying to understand I'm trying to flesh out more of that picture, but it's not a debate. It's not a debate. Because quite frankly, if that person has authority in the organization and they have money and they're willing to take and they are accountable, why wouldn't I necessarily follow them? Now, can I ask you a question? Was this successful when y'all did?
Yeah. You know what? I mean, this was a while ago, but it was a great project to work on, and I think it was probably the first one to market. There will have been fast followers after, right? But yeah, it was really interesting when you were talking about mental models there. That again was really resonating with me, because so often as BAs we're dealing with people who have vastly different mental models about the world, and it looks like they're communicating, but they're really not, only very superficially. And I was just thinking as you were saying that, and this is a slight tangent, but what one technique we might use as BAs is like a rich picture, which is really just a way of drawing. It's a mental model, right? But you can say this, and you can say but you can start to see connections between things. But what's really interesting, Lori, in fact, I can watch the video for the moment you said this and see my reaction. But when you said something like, actually, intuition is a form of qualitative data, and we can't be 100% scientific. And I think I kind of went, because I must admit, as an analyst, I guess I intuitively know that. But we always talk about objectivity, and it's almost like intuition is bad. And I think you've changed my opinion of that.
Yeah. Intuition is not bad, and we're going to have to figure out how to factor it into decision making. So if I might just kind of like, I'll leave it for the moment, and then if you can come back to that particular topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I'm hearing as well is, in terms of business analysis and getting early involvement into projects like the one we've just mentioned, really a way of doing that is to get involved with, to understand, to engage with, to own or oversee that process of the spark of insight, helping to understand the data needs, but perhaps even, as you suggested earlier, starting at the other end and saying, what decision do you need to make? And actually, how can so if we understand that framework, then we can shift left and get involved earlier, rather than be served up with I've made all the decisions and here's the solution, go do requirements for it type of thing.
That's correct. So I want to pick up on two pieces of that. One is you need to orchestrate, again, that whole piece. But the second piece that you said is very critical too. Early on when we were talking about this woman and seeing another tool you can use, drawings also engage whole brain. So stories are whole brain activity. Visuals are a whole brain activity. And I oftentimes will stand an executive in front of a board or a piece of paper and just say, draw for me. Draw for me how this all kind of evolved for you. And it might look messy. On the other hand, as they're drawing it, they might also see some connections that they didn't even know they had made themselves, which then helps me to help other people to appreciate what it is that they would like us to do.
Definitely. So moving on to a slightly different topic, because another use that another place where there's often a lot of data in organizations is about projects. So every time a project is sort of run or whatever, often organizations will have timesheets where people will fill in the amount of time they spend on the requirements or the design or whatever, and there'll also be estimates of those things, and this goes into a big central system somewhere, never to be seen again. And then we do our estimates for our next projects, and we make them up out of thin air. I mean, we base them on intuition and experience, when there's this whole repository of data that's not being tapped into. And I mean, that's just one example that I see often as a BA. I'm sure that exists in every department. There's data that we're just not, it feels to me like we're missing an opportunity to learn.
We are. So let me, if I can, step back from that, because there's so much that you're asking me in that example.
Yeah.
Because one of the things you're asking me is we have a lot of data that's stored, right? That's one piece of the equation. So let me share with you a situation that you don't want to have happen, because this is, and I'll talk about why it's problematic, but I'm going to use a little bit different scenario to kind of lead into this. So I want you to imagine that I have the head of maybe marketing research, and this person has voluminous amounts of data and has just recognized what you've recognized. We're not doing anything with the data. So you're a consultant to the organization, and you hear this executive say to you one day, "Oh, I figured out what to do with that data. I gave it to a consulting firm." You say, "You gave it to a consulting firm? What do you mean you gave it to a consulting firm?" And you say, "Yeah." The executive says, "Yeah, I'm hoping that they'll come back to me with some insights." So that's what we do sometimes when we have boatloads of data, right? We don't even look at it ourselves. We say, let someone else look at it, and they'll figure out what meaning it might have for us. And you say to them, "You're not going to get anything from it." And the executive says, "What do you mean I'm not going to get anything from it?" And the person says, and let's assume, just for the sake of the example, that the context is that we're talking about retail brick and mortar stores. That's where the data has come from. And the consultant says, you say as a consultant, "Well, you might find out that women with red Cole Haan shoes come in twice a week to shop, and they never shop on a Friday." And you know what you're going to say? You're going to say, as a business leader, "That's interesting." So a couple months goes by, executive comes to you and says, "I got the results back from the consulting firm." And you say, "What'd you get?" And the executive says, "I got a whole bunch of interesting." Now, why did I just share that with you? Interesting is what we call observation.
Yes.
What's happening with this data, and the reason people ignore it, is they're only looking at the data or the visualizations of the data, like the actual observation of it. They're not moving to insight. Now, if you think about the larger continuum, and I look at people's reaction. So when I give people data, chances are they're going to say to me, "Oh, okay." If I give them observations, which might be in the form of data visualizations, they're going to go, "Oh, that's interesting." That still doesn't get me to action. And so what we have to start to figure out is, how do we get at insight from those observations? And again, going back to my definition of insight, this is a little bit different now, because now this is in the middle between the data and the decision. In my contention is, there's three types of insights you can have. One is a new knowledge insight, like, "Oh my goodness, if we connect the dots, or if we look at this missing piece, we can learn something new." So let's stay with our example, and I'm just going to conjecture for a minute. Maybe I'm the one who's doing the analytics on this, and I'm like, we got back a whole bunch of interesting, and it's not telling us anything. And now my executive has given it to me to see if I can make any sense out, make more sense out of it, make meaning from it. And by the way, sense making and meaning making are very different. And I call up one of the retail stores. I'm like, what can it hurt? What can it hurt to call a store and just say, "We're finding that women who wear red Cole Haan shoes shop in your store twice a week, but never on Fridays. And the person on the phone says, oh, you just figured that out? Like, what do you mean? They're like, well, in the shopping mall where we're located, there's a new fitness center, and it's for kids. And what's happening is these moms are dropping their kids off for like swim practice or tennis lessons or something else. And they're coming in our store. And those happen to be on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And we kind of noticed too. There are these new patterns. And you stand back and you say to yourself, oh my gosh, never even thought about that. Now I've got like a new knowledge, insight. So now I might call a few more stores and I might say, hey, by the way, is there a new fitness center that's been attached to your shopping center? And they go, yeah, we're starting to see this too, and it's been in the last 6 months. Now I can go back to my executive and say, I took some of those observations. I went and I got some qualitative data because I said this is not helping us at all. And now maybe I have a new knowledge insight. Whoa, these women are coming regularly. They got nothing else to do. They're coming to our store. Now, from a marketing perspective, I can say, what action do I want to take? And there's 2 types of action I could take. I could take a familiar action. Oh, when we saw this before, here's how we dealt with that. Here's how we got more business. Or I might take an innovative sort of action. I might say, let's go partner with these facilities.
Yep.
Right? And say, when you sign your kids up for these lessons, you're going to get a discount from us. And so it becomes a partnered relationship. But that's the first piece about this, is that we have to understand that if we have a lot of data, we cannot farm it out. Mm-hmm. We cannot farm it out because the people we farm it out to do not know 2 things well. One is they don't understand the decision you're trying to make, and they don't understand your business context all that well. Now, I say that, and then on the other hand, I say to myself, well, as a consultant, for example, I've worked in 30 different professional associations. Does that give me the opportunity to be able to give insight to my clients? And the answer is yes, because I'm kind of like I've been working in them, right?
Yeah.
So if
you
got a lot of experience, right, then maybe you can help your clients with that insight. So I think that's the first piece. The second piece goes back to, if I can harken back to something that you said a few minutes ago, and that is this whole issue around data and intuition, right? Mm-hmm. So I remember sitting in a restaurant in New York with a colleague of mine who's from Gartner. And I had this discussion. I'm like, David, I don't understand. Like, what is the connection? We're saying that we need this data, and it could be qualitative or quantitative data. We're leaning more towards quantitative, right, in organizations. But then I know from my academic work that, intuition's a form of data. And I literally, at the moment I said this to him, I like looked down at my meal and I looked at him and I said, I just asked a stupid question. And he's like, why? I said, it's right here. It's right here. It's right here. Here's the connection. My brain. It was kind of like this. And when it's all about blending, it's all about human reasoning and choices and decisions and melding those 2 pieces together. Now, it just so happens that Paul Schumacher with MIT has written a brilliant article on his research about this. And his research came out kind of after I had this kind of like aha myself, this insight. And he talks about that we cannot segregate these 2. They are blended. Now, let's talk about why, from a brain perspective, they need to be blended. So are you familiar at all with Daniel Kahneman's work?
Thinking fast and slow.
Yeah, thinking fast and slow. So, right. Yeah. So this is profound. We did not have this research years ago. But what we now know, and he talks about the difference between system 1 and system 2. Mm-hmm. And he says that system 1 is how our brain makes most of our decisions. And system 1 is fast and unconscious and intuitive and automatic. We ain't never getting rid of it, folks. We ain't never getting rid of it. It's there to stay. System 2, which is kind of like our second guesser, is slow and methodical and deliberate and effortful. But even if you make a system 2 decision, The next time you have to make it, it becomes a system one decision. Because the brain says, I can't give all of this, my brain power to every single decision. Like think about walking into a grocery store, right? You'd be overwhelmed.
Absolutely.
You know, it's kind of like me when I walk in and I have to buy toothpaste and there's like 50 varieties of toothpaste and I can't make a decision, right? That's my brain is overwhelmed too. So the brain, the human brain is structured for fast, unconscious, intuitive. It's structured that way. And guess what? So are our workplaces. You tell me, do you know of a workplace or a business leader who's not distracted today?
No.
Do you know of any business leader who's not on overload today?
No. I mean, I know business leaders that manage distractions well, but that's like a self-medicating type thing, isn't it?
Exactly. Do you know of any business leaders who really care about every single topic that people bring them?
Well, most business leaders I know haven't got time to read every email they receive or pick up every phone call they receive.
So what that also means is that they're probably, when they're listening to you, they're giving you one ear, not two ears. Would that be a fair guess?
Yeah, I think, I think clearly there are always people who have personal relationships and will listen more thoroughly. But in general terms, I think, and I think it's probably not just business leaders, but throughout organizations, people are so distracted by every single ping on a mobile phone, and notification and email. It's hard to stay focused.
Right. So what that's telling us is that we live in a world of system one thinking, and yet, like, take the awesome model from data science, it assumes we're living in a system two world, and we're not there. And we cannot, again, we have to start letting go of some of these well-founded ways of looking at data. I'm not saying don't use it because it's helpful, but it's not the way a business thinks. It's not the way a business operates. It's not what we have the capacity or the time to do. So what that means, which is really going to be hard for some people, is you can never be data-driven. You never can be a data-driven organization. It's like, give it up. Give it up. What you can be is a data-informed organization, a data-enabled organization, or what Cassie, a woman who writes for Google, she's an evangelist for Google as a data scientist, and she writes prolifically on Medium. She talks about it as being data-inspired. So we have a data scientist who's saying data-driven is an impossibility. Like, she's one of the top data scientists in the world, and she's saying, now we can be data-inspired. Mm-hmm. So I went in search of, I tried to find, and I'd love to share this with you. I wanted to find a print article. And if people want, by the way, any of these articles that I'm referring to, just all you have to do is like link to me on LinkedIn, and just tell me what you want. I'd be more than happy to send this to you or put you down the right path. But I found an article by a woman by the name of Uzma Barlasker. And she wrote this last September of 2018. And she talks about the difference between data-driven and data-informed, but she actually does it with an example. And I just think that this is a brilliant way of talking about it. So what she asks us to do is she asks us to pretend we're a news publisher. Mm-hmm. And we're deciding how to frame the headlines of the news reports. And so you try a few different variants, and you find the one that is what they call a clickbaity title. So it baits you to want to come and read it, okay? It gets the most clicks. She says, what's going to happen if you try to zoom towards being a data-driven decision-making organization is, this is what you're going to see. You're going to see, when you look at the data, clicks are up. Visitations, which is the top-line metric for this publisher, are up. Revenues, since they run the CPM ads, is up. That's great. All our key metrics are up. Let's ship headings with clickbaity titles. Mm-hmm. End of story. Now, she says if we're a data-informed decision-making organization, this is what we're going to do instead. And I want you to start to listen for how intuition and this human reasoning gets blended into the conversation. She says all our key metrics are up. That's good. What are the counter metrics? The bounce rate is up. That doesn't seem like a good experience if users are bouncing. What about our long-term countermetrics? Do we think clickbaity titles are good for our users? Would it hurt sentiment towards our publishing brand? By the way, why are clickbaity titles working? Content that piques users' curiosity does well. Instead of writing clickbaity headlines, can we integrate this insight into our content strategy? Maybe what we need to do is we need to write about topics that people are curious about, but may not know enough about. Because maybe that's really what's underlying. And this, to me, when she put this on paper, I'm like, this is what we want to head towards. Now, what we have to start talking about is, how does the BA factor into this, right? Because that's kind of our focus for today, but this is true for anyone who works with data. You have to be the person who's orchestrating these conversations along this continuum, right? So,
Yeah.
so that's another, would that be another piece, I think, of what you're getting at with this? I mean, there's more that I can cover if you'd like.
well, so much of what you're saying, Lori, is resonating. Even the quote from that article, those questions, they're very BA questions. I mean, we ask why a lot as BAs, and so this is really interesting, Lori, and I'm absolutely sure we could talk about this for another hour, but we are sadly coming to the conclusion of our allotted time. But what I'd be really keen to know is, what would your biggest message for the business analysis community be right now, Lori?
I think right now my biggest message is the time is now. You have to capitalize on this role right now. And if you do not capitalize on it, what's going to happen in your organization is they're going to create a new job description for a new type of data person, and this role will not be for your taking. Now, when I was at the Building Business Capability Conference in November, I met 2 individuals who actually are playing this role. And when I said to them, is there a job description that defines what you're doing? They both laughed at me and said no. I just said, I'm going to, and this is what I tell people, is just step into it. Learn this continuum. I mean, the piece we didn't talk about today, which is still is a very critical piece that you have to learn about, is the story piece of it, right? The business storytelling part of it, because that's huge. As I said, a data visualization is not a story. You have to understand how to craft narrative story from an insight, not the observations or the data visualizations. And that's a whole separate skill in and of itself. But take the time now, build the relationships with people, start inserting yourself in conversations, say to someone, I'll be the person who kind of, knows this whole continuum, and learn it. I mean, I've been teaching workshops on this approach now for several years to a whole variety of different sorts of people. And what they walk away with saying to me is, it's like, I got it. I only need like a day or two, Lori. I got it. I can go do this. I can see myself inserting into initiatives, and I know how I can add strategic value, right? The strategic value. I don't have to know the analytics piece all in depth. I just have to know what one of my colleagues would say is enough. Enough about each and every one of these pieces. And then I just need to do it now. I need to get involved. So that would be like, I'm sorry, I'm so passionate about this.
But that's great. And I mean, it is, the time is now. That's a really a strong and compelling message. And, in the business analysis community, it's probably fair to say we've all seen, other roles. There are grey areas between other roles where other roles are being created. And I mean, I know before this session, you sent me a number of articles, including one from a link to the Harvard Business Review about the, I think, data translator role. And I was reading it thinking, this is a form of business analysis. Like, business analysis is broader than this, but this is this is what a BA could do. But like, once it's in HBR, it's like it's the truth, right? It becomes, so that role will start to progress. So I think it's really healthy for us in the BA community to be talking about this. And I know we've spoken for an hour tonight, a few hours beforehand. you say people learn from you in a day. I think I've learned lots from you in like 3 hours. So I will be keeping an eye out for when you're next in the UK to register for one of your sessions. And I'd encourage anyone on the call, please do check out Lori's session. So I'm absolutely sure people will want to stay in touch with you, Lori. You've mentioned LinkedIn. I know you've written a number of books. How can people engage with the material that you've created and get to know more about your work?
Well, right now I'm using the LinkedIn platform as the kind of as the source for all of the things that I'm doing. My plan is, and I haven't figured out if I'm going to do this in articles or videos, but I've sketched out like a whole series of pieces that are what I call confronting myth conceptions. We have so many, just like we've addressed some of them today, but there are so many of them that are out there that people have been taught, continue to be taught, buy into, and we need to start dialing back on those if we want to have success. I mean, because let's look at the Tom Davenport article, which kicked off this keynote, right? I mean, that referenced the research that says our data efforts are failing. Mm-hmm. They're not successful. And they're not successful because we keep buying into some of these myth conceptions. So connect to me on LinkedIn, write me letters there. That's the best way, because those pieces will come out, as I said, either through articles or through videos. You can certainly check out, I have a business storytelling website, www.business-storytelling.com. That's where my 3 books on business storytelling are located. And my business is partnersforprogress.com. You're going to see a little bit older website. We're in the process of creating a new one, so bear with me as we start to make some of that transition. But you'll see some of my earlier consulting work that really, and my speaking work, that informs what it is that I'm doing today. Because I really do feel blessed. I feel blessed that I've kind of found that sweet spot for me. My legacy, as I said, where all of these pieces have come together in a beautiful sort of fashion. And my goal is to help worldwide to bring these ideas forward so that people can have successes, right? But again, we need to capitalize now. The time is now.
The time is now. So if people connect, well, check out your websites, your books, connect with you on LinkedIn, and then they'll see where when you're speaking or you have upcoming seminars and sessions. So all that's left for me to say, Lori, is thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here. It's been such an insightful and interesting session. I really do appreciate it, as I know our audience does as well. Also, a massive thank you to everyone who's tuned in live, or indeed anyone who's watching the recording. As a reminder, these webinars, the BA community webinars, the idea really was to create a platform, a conversation around topics that are maybe on the edge of the BA community that we're not talking about enough, of which this, I think, is definitely one of them. And do keep an eye out for our next webinar. Our next webinar will be in April, where we've got Jamie Champagne from all the way in Hawaii, a fantastic, another fantastic speaker, who'll be talking about some of the elicitation techniques we might use as BAs. Now, of course, that's a fairly staple technique, but how often do we talk about it? How often do we talk about doing it better? Probably not enough. So do take a look for that webinar as well. Thank you once again for joining us. Thank you, Lori. I'm sure we'll speak again soon. And good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world, and hope to connect with you all soon.
Thank you, Adrian.